Academia is more than research output and publications. In this seminar series, we discuss the personal and social aspects of academic work that are not discussed enough. Welcome to Life in Academia.
Hello, everybody. I'm Ghazal Shakeri, and welcome to Life in Academia, a seminar series in which we aim to understand how academia and society play into each other. I am very, very happy that you joined us in this expected to be maybe a tougher session of Life in Academia, potentially, because today we will chat to Jana from TU Graz in Austria. And Jana is, I stalked her earlier today and I saw her CV and she's objectively an excellent researcher. But today Jana is not going to talk about being successful in academia, but she will talk about abuse of power in academia and what it is, how to tackle it, and I want to thank you, Jana. Thank you for doing this extracurricular work because it is extracurricular to some extent, isn't it? And for raising awareness, because I can imagine that your motivation to talk about this topic and to talk about people about this topic comes from a very, very, I want to say beautiful place, because as a person at the receiving end of abuse of power, at the at the lower levels of the hierarchy chain, potentially, I think when a person is in this position, they are probably very, very vulnerable, very scared and very lonely. And you, on the other hand, you try to raise awareness, you try to have conversations about this topic, you try to make it as transparent, as easily navigatable as possible. And abuse of power in our circles is sadly very prevalent. And yes, thank you so much for just having these conversations with people and audiences. And that's why I wanted to acknowledge your very, very generous move to come to Life in Academia today and unpack some of these difficult things that we need to tackle, right? So thanks for the honor of choosing us. And again, today's topic may be a sensitive one for many potentially in the audience. So while appreciate Jana talking to us, I do not expect anybody to open up about any experiences that are too painful or that they feel uncomfortable with sharing. And that's that. So, right, Jana, how are you and what is abuse of power?
Well, thank you, Ghazal, for the invite. Let me quickly share my screen here. So this has worked previously, it will work again. All right, so you should all see my screen now. So yeah, as Ghazal already said, today I'm here not as a researcher, but the hat I wear is that of a member of the Network Against the Abuse of Power in Science, in German Netzwerk gegen Machtmissbrauch in der Wissenschaft. A organization that was founded about 2 years ago and spans Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And yeah, let me start a bit with a brief history, how I came to be here and talk about power abuse. Thankfully, I was never at the receiving end. But throughout my career in academia, I did a lot of representation of early career researchers. So I did study physics in Göttingen, not far from Oldenburg. And I also did my PhD there from 2015 to 2018 at the Max Planck Institute for Dynamics and Self-Organization. And very early on, like 2 months after I started my PhD, I somehow got coerced into being the institute representative for PhDs. And being a person that follows problems through to the very root, I advanced in the hierarchy of PhD representatives from being an institute representative to being a section representative. And eventually in 2018, I became the spokesperson of the Max Planck PhD Net, representing about 5,000 doctoral researchers in the Max Planck Society. Currently, I'm not in the Max Planck Society anymore. I'm now in Graz, where I'm a Marie Curie Fellow doing computational social science, but that's not for today. I am also a board member of this Network Against the Abuse of Power in Science. And this whole interest in power abuse, or perceiving it as a significant problem in academia, started in 2018, when I was the spokesperson of the Max Planck PhD Net, where two very high-profile cases of power abuse hit the Max Planck Society, one in Garching and one in Leipzig. And very suddenly there was a lot of media attention to the topic. It was not like we weren't aware that this is an issue in the PhD representation beforehand, but this increased media attention suddenly also created the awareness in the Max Planck leadership, but also with many, many doctoral researchers that recognized themselves in these high-profile cases and thought, oh, wait a second, something similar is happening to me as well. And all these people called me, because I was the president of the PhD representation, and wanted to tell their stories. So during the time, I had about 15, maybe 20 conversations with people in very similar situations. And I started to see the systematic problems, the patterns behind these individual cases. And I started to see, or to recognize, that this is not a problem that is on the individual that has a conflict with the supervisor. It's really a systematic problem, a problem with academia that encourages these situations. And that led a few years later to the foundation of this network against abuse of power in science, and also to a formulation of a white paper that basically summarizes what I'm going to tell you today, that you could also read if you're interested. So what I'm going to talk about today is, first of all, I'm going to try to define what power abuse is and illustrate it with a few examples, and also try to show you how it is a systematic problem and not an individual one. I'm going to describe some serious consequences of power abuse regarding mental health, and also the increasing unwillingness of early career researchers to pursue an academic career. And I'm going to end with suggestions for solutions on the institutional, but also on the individual level. And I already said to Gözer earlier on, this talk was condensed from a 1-hour version to a hopefully 30 minutes version. If I go massively over time, I expect to be interrupted, and I also expect to be interrupted if you have questions while I'm talking. I'm going to try to see if somebody raises a hand, and Gözer is also going to help me and notify me if there's a question. And also feel free to drop a question in the chat if you're not comfortable speaking up. All right, so I like to start describing power abuse with what I call power abuse in the wild, with cases that actually happened and were described to me. I changed a few details to protect the anonymity of the affected people, but with these cases, I think it becomes immediately clear that something is going wrong. So let's start with the first case that deals with extortion of labor. So that's something that we see a lot in academia, where people are made to work more than they are actually contractually obliged to. The situation in this case is that we have a doctoral researcher, after 4 years into their PhD project. They have enough publications for a cumulative thesis according to the rules of the university, and they want to finish. They want to move on. The PI has other plans. They want another publication from the PhD and prevents them from finishing. The consequence is that the degree is delayed, and eventually the working contract also expires. The doctoral researcher keeps working on unemployment money. And in the end, because of this falling out between the two of them, the PI also declines to write a letter of recommendation for the doctoral researcher. The ombudsperson of the institute is contacted by the doctoral researcher, but doesn't intervene because they feel they're not responsible for the situation, since it's not scientific misconduct. By the way, power abuse, misconduct in supervision relationships is codified as scientific misconduct by the DFG, since they updated their rules of scientific conduct in, I think, 2019. The outcome is that the doctoral researcher does receive their degree, but their academic career is over and they leave science. The second case deals with neglect. So we have a situation where an international doctoral researcher with a short contract is in a lab where the PI and the lab assistant are a married couple. The doctor researcher saves up their vacation because they want to take a long vacation to visit their family abroad. But the PI has other plans because they want to have the lab work finished quickly. They have a falling out over this, and eventually this leads to a lack of support by the lab assistant that is married to the PI. Because of this lack of support and materials in the lab, the doctor researcher has bad results, and because of the bad results, the contract is not extended. The Works Council or Ombudsperson are not contacted. Why? Because the doctor researcher, being from abroad, simply doesn't know that they exist and could be of help in this situation. And in the end, the PhD project is aborted. And the last case that I want to describe deals with bad scientific practice, which can be, and oftentimes is, a side product or outcome of power abuse. We have a situation where there is a famous PI that has many doctoral researchers, gives very risky PhD projects, very short contract durations, and we have an international doctoral researcher working on one of these projects with a young family. Contract extensions are tied to producing positive results, and the doctoral researcher's visa is tied to the working contract. As a result, the doctoral researcher is under immense pressure, works 70 hours plus a week, doesn't take any vacation. They consider contacting the ombudsperson, but since that ombudsperson is themselves in a dependent relationship on the PI, they don't trust them. The outcome is sloppy science. In the best case, in the worst case, it's actually manufacturing of data or positive results. And of course, immense psychological pressure on the doctoral researcher. So in all of these cases, I think it's pretty obvious to somebody that listens to these descriptions that something that is wrong is going on there. But it's sometimes very hard to pin down what exactly. So let me try to give a more formal definition of abuse of power. First of all,
can I ask a quick question? What does ombudsperson mean? Oh,
an ombudsperson is a, so that's, I think, a pretty German thing. It's a person, usually elected or appointed, of an academic institution that is responsible for investigating and settling cases of scientific misconduct. All right, so having and using power in itself is not morally reprehensible, and sometimes it's necessary to effectively lead an organization. But when power is used, interests have to be weighed against each other, and we have to assess what the consequences of the person using the power, or of the use of the power, are on the person using the power and on the persons that are affected. The more the person that is using the power is acting for their own benefit while damaging other people in an illegitimate way, the more it is a case of the abuse of power. Sadly, such unethical behavior can be legal and even in the interest of academic institutions, especially as long as it's not discovered. As long as it leads to an abundance of positive results and a lot of high-impact publications and third-party funding, the academic organization in itself does not have an incentive to prevent such behavior. Are we talking about singular cases here? There isn't that much data yet on power abuse in academia, but it's slowly coming. There is a very nice survey by the German Association of Psychologists from 2020 that specifically asked about experiences of harassment at work, and they define harassment as regular behavior that creates an intimidating, hostile, socially isolating, discriminating, or offensive working environment. And about 50%, a bit more than 50% of their respondents reply that they often or regularly witness or experience such harassment at work. So here we are talking about numbers that are definitely not singular cases anymore. They also asked to what extent these reported harassment cases are contingent on there being a hierarchy in the working relationship. And again, a large majority of the respondents said that they're mostly or completely these witnessed or experienced cases of harassment are contingent on the hierarchy. Similar numbers come from the Max Planck Society, where the PhD representation that I was part of at the time also conducted a survey. And they asked whether people while working at their institute have been subjected to harassment by a superior. And the numbers vary between 10 and 20%. We split by gender, and here the green bars are whether the people are from Germany within the EU or outside the EU. But between 10 and 20% have experiences with harassment. And here again, this is not singular cases. This is 1 or 2 in 10. So we're actually talking about quite a lot of people. The third data point is from a survey conducted by Nature Careers. They asked a bit of a different question, but it goes in the same direction. So they asked whether people have experienced power imbalances or bullying, and they didn't ask PhD students, they asked doctoral researchers, and about 2/3 say they have experienced power imbalances or bullying, but also gender discrimination, which is also a very concerning number here. So why do we see these very high numbers of power abuse in academia? Academia is a place that has a great number of power differentials between people. So there is a lot of opportunity to actually abuse power. We kind of tried to look at this a bit more systematically in a publication from 2020, where we spelled out these power differentials in detail. Here, I'll just give you a summary. One of them is obviously the power over the working relationship. So oftentimes PIs single-handedly decide about contract durations and extensions. And for people from non-EU countries, this is exacerbated by the fact that the visa depends on the working contract. So this is really a lot of power that the PI has over a person. Then, of course, we have the power of assessment, especially in cases where we have doctoral researchers, and the PI is responsible both for the supervision and the assessment of the PhD in the end. We have the power over reputation. Reputation is the foundation of an academic career that is codified in the letter of the recommendation by the PI in the end. And there is no right to a good letter of recommendation. So this is another power differential, or another aspect of power that PIs have. And lastly, a power differential that I think is oftentimes overlooked is institutional knowledge. So early career researchers fluctuate a lot, and this is intended and wanted by the system. But due to this high fluctuation, on average, the early career researchers know less about their institution and their rights than their supervisors do, and they're in a worse position to actually defend themselves. Academia is also a favorable place to the abuse of power. Many people, according to this survey by Chapman et al. From 2019, experience academia as not only enabling unethical behavior, but actually actively rewarding and incentivizing it. Potentially, this is because the discovery of abusive behavior is extremely unlikely, because there are very few compliance mechanisms. There's many conflicts of interests between people that are supposed to check and regulate, and people that are supposed to be regulated and checked. And the victims of this unethical behavior are oftentimes too afraid to report their experiences. And the punishment of abusive behavior is even more unlikely, because the institutions, as I already said, do not really have an incentive to pursue perpetrators, as long as the behavior is kept under wraps and doesn't become public. So the possible consequence of this mixture of ingredients is that all people that work in the academic system on average show more unethical behavior than they would where the circumstances different. Now, when I give this talk, or I have conversations with people, especially in leadership positions, I oftentimes hear the comment or the criticism that, yeah, but it's also the early career researchers that engage in this behavior. And to this I say, yes, there are cases where also early career researchers abuse the little power they have. But coming back to the survey by the German Association of Psychology, it's actually mostly the superiors or senior colleagues that are the perpetrators in this abusive behavior. So here 2/3 say that the harassment at work or the bad scientific practice that they experienced or witnessed come from a superior or supervisor or from a senior colleague. So while, of course, we can't say it's only superiors, it is still mostly coming from people that are higher up in the hierarchy. Why is that the case? Here I'm going to make the argument that academia actually systematically selects for people that are more prone to abuse their power. We know that integrity, personal integrity, is a stable trait that does vary across people. And the willingness to exploit and cheat others can actually be advantageous for an academic career, especially if accompanied by high intelligence, which is very often the case in academia. And since we select academic leaders still exclusively or almost exclusively based on their excellence in research, so the output they produce, this leads to a situation that people that are predisposed towards abusing their power are first of all drawn into academia, and when in academia, they're more likely to make it to powerful positions. So we actually do select for people that are more likely to abuse their power. Now, a brief summary. I hope I convinced you that power abuse in academia is rampant and not limited to singular cases. We have between 15 and 25% of academics that report that they are affected by harassment at work, and about 20% report that they are affected by bad scientific practice. The academic system systematically fosters the abuse of power by the way it is set up with these steep hierarchies and the multifaceted dependencies between early career researchers and their superiors. And the mechanisms that select academic leadership personnel favors people that are predisposed to abuse their power. Now, to the serious consequences. Again, I'm going to show you the little bit of data that we have, and this is all correlations. So take it with a grain of salt. I think there is intensifying evidence that mental health issues and also the unwillingness to stay in academia have something to do with this abusive superiors, but it's still correlational evidence. So this is from a survey, again, of the Max Planck Society, doctoral researchers in the Max Planck Society. We gave them clinical questionnaires on anxiety and depression and asked them about anxiety and depression symptoms. And we see that about half report high or symptoms consistent with high anxiety disorder, and about 20 to 25% report severe or moderate to 15 to 20% report severe or moderate to severe symptoms of depression. This is consistent with other studies in other countries and also with a recent meta-study. The prevalence of depression and anxiety in early career researchers is about twice as high as the prevalence in a comparable cohort with similar degrees and similar age that do not work in academia. So this is pretty concerning numbers. In the same survey of the Max Planck Society, we can also see a very strong correlation between symptoms of depression and anxiety and satisfaction with the supervision relationship. So here the bars are ordered from very satisfied with the supervision relationship to very dissatisfied. And the color of the bars indicates the severity of the anxiety symptoms, and to the right, the severity of the depression symptoms. So you can see that the more dissatisfied the people get with the supervision relationship, also the more symptoms of mental health problems they have. Of course, this could be a reverse causation. So it could be that people that are very dissatisfied also are more prone to getting mental health problems, but at least this correlation exists and is rather strong. We can see the same trend with anxiety, also depression, but I only show anxiety, and experiences with harassment. So here we asked people while working at your institute, have you ever been affected by harassment by a superior or supervisor? And from the left to the right, there's never to weekly. And we see that the people that have never been affected by harassment show less anxiety. I mean, 50% is still a very high number, but for the people that are affected by harassment weekly, there is nobody that doesn't have an anxiety disorder. And the same goes for experiences with unwanted behavior that the affected person would describe as sexualized violence. So I think this is very intuitive. People that are in these situations tend to develop mental health problems. There are many factors that influence mental health. Here I just show you the correlation of depression and the correlation with anxiety for different factors that describe an academic working environment. And you can see that the workload, the work environment, the atmosphere, and the supervision relationship are all very highly correlated with depression, symptoms of depression and anxiety. Other things like the availability of psychological support, medium, the availability of good lab equipment, not at all. And these are all factors that are more or less under the control of the supervisor. So again, correlational evidence, but it all points in a consistent direction. Again, coming back to this Nature survey, they asked people whether mental health is a reason for them to leave academia. And about half of the people said that they have actually actively considered leaving academia because of depression or anxiety. And this leads me to these nice two headlines from summer last year, one from Nature, one from Science, that both feature PIs complaining about the lack of postdocs. So where have all the postdocs gone? To me, it intuitively does make sense that people increasingly are not willing to work in an environment that systematically makes them sick. So to summarize, mental health issues are rampant among academics, similar to experiences with power abuse. And there are many indicators that a bad relationship between supervisor and early career researcher plays an important role for these mental health issues to emerge. The working conditions in academia increasingly cause people to consider leaving academia. I recently heard a statistic, I can't find the source anymore, but it was from, I think, the rector of the neighboring university in Graz that said about 10 years ago, 16% of doctoral researchers said that they would consider an academic career, and now it's only 9%. So the number was cut in half approximately, which I think is a very concerning trend for academia. Not for the people. It's probably a good decision. So to the last point, what can we do? Well, first of all, I want to convince you that the existing mechanisms that we have to deal with power abuse in academia do not work. This is a part that I shortened considerably. The sources are, again, this survey by the German Association of Psychologists and the Max Planck survey report. We see that very few cases are actually reported. Only 20 to 25% of experienced or witnessed harassment are reported, and only 10 to 15% of scientific misconduct. Why? Probably because there is a significant chance of facing negative consequences for the reporting person. So we asked people that actually did report a case whether what kind of consequences the report had, and about 1 in 10 said that there were negative consequences for their career. So if I have a 10% chance of ending my academic career, I will consider reporting my experiences. And the people that did report experienced the institutional support as non-existent or lacking. The satisfaction with the outcome of the report is also very low, and only 10 to 20% are mostly or completely satisfied with the outcome of their report. So what can we do to improve the situation? I'm going to start with things that should happen on a societal or institutional level, and then go to things that people that are affected by these situations can do. And I hope that I don't take more than 5 minutes to go through this. So unethical behavior is not necessarily illegal, as I said in the beginning. So the law that we have is not sufficient to prevent it. Because of that, and because there are situations where it's very clear that something unethical and unwanted is happening, but it's not covered by the law, institutions should make their values and the behavior that they want versus the behavior that they do not want explicit in a code of conduct, analogous to the rules of good scientific practice that are also codified in such codes. And these values and wanted or unwanted behaviors should be anchored in an institution's working culture, for example, via regular and mandatory workshops that discuss case studies, just as the ones that I just showed you in the beginning. And taboos should be broken and explicitly discussed, especially around sexualized violence, antisocial leadership behavior that is very common in academia, conflicts of interests that we all have eventually, and also misaligned incentive structures in the academic system. We can start by reducing power differentials. If there is less hierarchy, less difference in power, then there is less opportunity to abuse these power differentials. As I said, power in itself is not problematic, but it becomes problematic if it's concentrated in a single person, e.g. the API. So a first step would be that supervision and assessment of dissertation projects should be separated, as is the case in many, many other countries that are not Germany, Austria, or Switzerland. Doctoral researchers could be supervised by thesis committees that include people that are independent of the primary supervisor and could step in case something goes wrong between the doctoral researcher and the primary supervisor. And the duration of working contract should equal the average duration of the PhD. In Germany, this is currently between 5 and 4 years. And this is something that we see a lot. I think about 50% of the cases that we see have something to do with contract extensions. This is a very, very regular point of friction where apparently the incentive to abuse the power is very high for people that can extend contracts. And positions after the PhD should be tenured as the rule rather than the exception. I mean, here we have a whole other conversation around Ich bin Hanna in Germany right now, but this would also do a lot to reduce possibilities to abuse power. A lot could be done to support victims. Currently, they're mostly left to fend for themselves. An institution should formulate mechanisms, emergency mechanisms that can start acting in case of power abuse, and not just in the moment where the power abuse already happened. These mechanisms should be formulated beforehand and communicated widely so people know what they're dealing with. These mechanisms include how to change a supervisor and also how funding can be secured after the change of supervisor happens. This includes nitty-gritty details like access to data and devices that are required to complete the PhD in case the supervisor is changed, as well as authorship of publications on which the doctoral researcher worked until the change of supervisor happened. And access to independent and free counseling, psychological counseling, and also legal advice. Professors oftentimes do have access to the university's legal department when they have conflicts. Early career researchers usually do have not this access. All right, I think creating more transparency in science can also go a long way to reduce instances of power abuse. Transparent work processes make misconduct less likely. There we can start with adhering to open science practices, publishing data code and protocols, and specifically stating who had what contribution in a publication. There's this nice credit framework that I linked here that people can follow to also make instances of, for example, honorary authorship less prevalent. There should be transparency around assessment processes, so who assesses whom and in which context, to reduce nepotism in the whole system. But transparency should also apply to processes that deal with power abuse cases. This is something that we see a lot, that people that do report are then completely left in the dark about what is currently happening. They don't know what are the next steps, what is the timeline, who has already been contacted, what are probable outcomes. So this really has to be professionalized and made more transparent to the people that are affected and that report the experiences. And sadly, also something that we see a lot is the so-called pasty harasser phenomenon. So there are people that are serial offenders in power abuse. And whenever it gets too bad at their current institution, they leave for the next institution. And there are sometimes even like serious investigations that do find the person guilty, but the results are kept secret by the institution and not communicated to the next institution. There was a very recent case that ended up at the University of Uppsala that you can read behind this link, So this definitely could be a bit more transparent. Also, a lot can be said for the strengthening of independent controls. So there's currently almost no external control of ethical conduct at research institutions. It's all left for the institutions themselves. But we have seen time and time again that the internal mechanisms that institutions establish are not sufficient. They are not trusted. They have no incentive to seriously pursue reports, and they also oftentimes do not have the power and standing to do this properly. So we need independent external bodies for conflict resolution and control, because the conflicting interests in the institutions are just too frequent. The German Research Ombudsman, this is a body by the DFG, so the largest German funding organization, is very helpful. They are actually an independent mechanism that can be contacted in such cases, but they are currently completely overloaded. So the responsible authorities need to be strengthened, first of all with sufficient resources, but then also the competencies to ensure that cases that get reported to them are properly pursued and consequences are imposed. All right. A lot can be said for demanding good leadership practices, but I will skip that for the sake of time. So the things I just told you, those are all on the institutional level, and many of them will require a lot of time to be implemented. So they're a bit of wishful thinking, a vision we can have that we can strive toward. But there are also things that people can do when they are affected themselves, that they don't need an institution to change its behavior. So I will end with a few measures for self-help that we have seen can help in dealing with these situations. The first is securing evidence of whatever you have experienced in a timely, detailed, and written way. So document your experiences, including a date, place, and potentially describing the people who were involved. And if possible, ask trusted people that witnessed situations to be available to witness what they have seen. Save digital documents, emails, lab notes, text messages at a secure place that is outside the influence of the employer, because we have seen that as soon as there is a falling out with the PI or the institution, access to emails can be gone very, very quickly. And if things have escalated, ask witnesses to join and document important meetings. For example, the Works Council or the Equal Opportunities Officer or person you trust. Knowing your rights also helps a lot. I know it's very difficult, especially if as an early career researcher, you move institutions and countries frequently, but if you perceive that you're entering a situation that is can be characterized as power abuse or an escalated conflict, knowing your rights is key. A few pointers are the employment law, the law about undue advantage, Vorteilsnahme in German, sexual self-determination, whistleblower protection, it's very new in Germany, copyright law, also very important for copyright on data, on publications, general equal treatment law, so the Allgemeines Gleichbehandlungsgesetz in Germany. Representatives like PhD or postdoc representations and also unions can help to navigate these laws. And networking with other affected people can also help a lot. Oftentimes, you will not be alone with these experiences. There will be other people with the same PI that have very similar experiences, and acting together can be very advantageous. Acting strategically is also important. Avoiding delicate communication, especially via email over institutional channels, is an important hint, because emails over institutional channels can be read by the institution. And also avoiding emotionally charged communication or threats towards a potential perpetrator. So keeping the moral high ground. Before writing an emotionally charged email, better sleep over it for another night and let a friend read it before sending something that you might regret in a week or a year. Also, strategically reflecting dependencies and developing a strategy to deal with them is key. So for example, and I hate to say this, but sometimes it might be safer to first finish the degree and then report the misconduct. Because we have seen that if things get very ugly, degrees might not be finished. And in such a case, there needs to be a strategy how to deal with this in a systematic way. And then when making arrangements with your opposing party or institution, only in writing and in the best case accompanied by legal counsel. Seeking help is also something that you should definitely consider doing. These situations of power abuse, if you're affected by them, they are extremely demanding and extremely difficult. So asking family or friends to support you in difficult times and also seeking professional help is not a shame and is totally warranted in such a situation. Asking for independent legal advice early can also help a lot. And a union membership in Germany, that's the GEW or Verdi, usually does cover legal protection insurance that covers labor law. Seeking out information about internal mechanisms like an ombudsperson, equal opportunity officer, works council can be helpful. Sometimes there are really good people working in these situations. They're just in bad positions because institutionally they don't have a lot of power. But if you find such a person that is trustworthy at your institution, they can be a very good resource. And lastly, that's the last thing I say, there is help available that's institutionally independent, such as the German Research Ombudsman that I already mentioned, but also this network against the abuse of power in science that I am a member of. We do try to help people in these situations and coach them through resolving them. And that's it. I went a little bit over time, sorry for that. And I hope there are many questions.
Thank you, Jana. I have learned so much today. I didn't know a lot of the things, obviously, and thanks so much for sharing and educating.